Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. The Federal Reserve pauses interest rate increases for the first time in 15 months, but suggests there will be more rate hikes soon. Just ahead, the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at his news conference, and we talked with an Associated Press economics reporter. Attorney General Merrick Garland defends Special Counsel Jack Smith and his team of prosecutors and agents who brought the indictment against former President Donald Trump on the federal charges dealing with the handling of classified documents, against charges of bias from the former president, calling that team experienced and talented. House Homeland Security Committee announces a 5-phase investigation of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas' policies on immigration and border security, possibly setting up an impeachment by the House Judiciary Committee. Head of the Federal Highway Administration talks about rebuilding the collapsed portion of Interstate 95 in Philadelphia. Vice President Kamala Harris speaks at a Juneteenth holiday celebration on the South Lawn of the White House. And we talked to C-SPAN's producer in London, Peter Knowles, about why former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson suddenly resigned from Parliament and whether he may try for a political comeback. Story from the Associated Press: the Federal Reserve kept its key interest rate unchanged Wednesday after having raised it 10 straight times to combat high inflation. But in a surprise move, the Fed signaled that it may raise rates twice more this year, beginning as soon as next month. The Fed's aggressive streak of rate hikes, which have made mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, and business borrowing costlier, have been intended to slow spending and defeat the worst bout of inflation in 4 decades. Average credit card rates have surpassed 20% to a record high. That from the Associated Press. The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell held a news conference at the Fed building in Washington, D.C.
My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. We understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Without price stability, the economy doesn't work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. We have raised our policy interest rate by 5 percentage points, and we've continued to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening have yet to be felt. In light of how far we've come in tightening policy, the uncertain lags with which monetary policy affects the economy, and potential headwinds from credit tightening, today we decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. Looking ahead, nearly all committee participants view it as likely that some further rate increases will be appropriate this year to bring inflation down to 2% over time.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at his news conference. He also spoke about how high interest rates will ultimately go.
If the economy evolves as projected, the median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 5.6% at the end of this year, 4.6% at the end of 2024, and 3.4% at the end of 2025. For the end of this year, the median projection is a 0.5 percentage point higher than in our March projections. I hasten to add, as always, that these projections are not a committee decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, the path for policy will adjust as appropriate to foster our maximum employment and price stability goals. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting based on the totality of incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks.
Associated Press reporter Chris Rugaber covers the Fed and the economy, joining us now by phone. Thanks for being with us. You wrote that after this pause in interest rate increases, the Fed signaling it may return to raising rates as early as July is a surprise move. Why is that?
Well, there was an expectation the Fed would pause, and I think the surprise has been that they are signaling now 2 rate hikes potentially down the road here, and most of the expectation was that there would maybe be one more additional quarter point hike. So there is definitely a more tough a tougher message coming out from this meeting that the Fed as a whole seems to be expecting that they're going to have to do more to bring down what they see as stubbornly high inflation.
At the same time, they're saying that they haven't yet seen all the signs of what they've done so far, what the effect is going to be.
Right. Well, I think what you're seeing is that Chair Jerome Powell wants to slow things down a bit, take more time, potentially continue to, if they do raise rates again, maybe it'll be every other meeting. They want to see more information because, right, they haven't seen, they're not yet satisfied. I mean, inflation has come down, but some of the stickier parts of it haven't yet moved as low as they like to see. So I think they want to take more time, see some more data about how it's affecting the economy and move at a more deliberate pace. I mean, remember last year they were raising interest rates 0.75 of a point every meeting. Then they went to a 0.5 point and then to a 1/4 point at every meeting. And now he was sort of portraying it as this is the next sort of step down in slowing their pace. Is maybe they're going to move every other meeting or something like that, although he wouldn't commit to anything like that. But that was the implication.
I remember there was a question about that distinction between the speed of the interest rate increases and the level of each increase. What point was the Fed chair making?
Well, I think also getting back to your earlier question, there is this sense that the interest rate hikes they're putting in place, it takes time to affect the economy. The wonky term is that, monetary policy has long and variable lags, meaning it just can take a year roughly or maybe more for it to fully take effect. And, the Fed would like to slow the economy enough to cool, spending and inflation. But if they can, they'd like to not cause a recession. So they're really trying to thread a needle here. It's a very, risky balance that they're trying to strike. And so by taking more time, that's why I think he's putting that emphasis on the pace as well as how many more, that if they can, again, perhaps slow things down, that they'll increase their chances of slowing the economy just enough without pushing us into a deeper recession than is necessary.
We're talking with Associated Press reporter Chris Rugaber. The estimate of what the terminal interest rate will need to be also has now gone higher. What goes into those estimates and the revisions?
Well, right. That's an interesting thing where, there's 18 members of this interest rate setting committee the Fed has. We often talk with the Fed as this, fortress institution, but it is made up of human beings, and there are 18 of them on this committee. They do only 11 actually have a vote, which is a whole nother story, but they all have a say in these debates, and they all 18 give an estimate of where they see the Fed's key rate going. And clearly many of them do seem to think it needs to go much higher, or at least a 0.5 point higher. That was more than people thought, and more of those 18 members supported additional rate hikes. So even though we see signs of inflation coming down, there was a report yesterday showing it had come down a fair amount in May. Clearly, a lot of them are still not satisfied. They are worried about inflation in areas like travel, restaurants, and some of these other services, and they want to see that come down more.
There was also some concern about raising interest rates would affect specifically jobs. Some senators, some Democratic senators, talk about layoffs being in the millions. Is there any concern at the Fed over this as the interest rates are going up, now paused, but will be going up again?
Well, right. I think so. On the one hand, I think there is a sense that there may have to be at least some increase in unemployment, which would reflect layoffs, and that's a very difficult thing to talk about. But it's a legitimate concern. I think the Fed's, what Chair Powell has said before is that so far they've raised rates a lot, and there hasn't been much of an increase in unemployment. In fact, businesses are still hiring, as we saw in the last jobs report. So that is a concern, but I think that gets to this attempt to maybe slow things down. The hope is that if they do slow down some of their rate hikes, take that slower pace, that they can, again, sort of thread that needle of bringing down inflation, ideally without many layoffs, as are feared.
Finally, you were at today's news conference with the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Any other thing come out of it that you see as a headline, as newsmaking?
Well, I think I think one thing that was interesting is he did say that, he sees some positive signs that trends are in place to bring down inflation. Goods prices are coming down. He does expect rents, apartment rents have been a big driver of inflation, and a lot of that is sort of reflective of all the moving around people did during the pandemic. People wanted more space. They wanted to get out of some of the bigger cities, and that's now sort of reversing, and that should bring down inflation. So he talked about, we see some things in place that may do the job, but it's taking too long. And they can't base their policy on forecasts. They want to see it actually happen. But I think that was a hopeful note from the press conference that he does see some things coming into place to bring inflation back down.
Chris Rugaber is an Associated Press economics reporter. You can find his stories at apnews.com and on Twitter at Chris Rugaber. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And reaction on Wall Street today, the Dow down 232, NASDAQ up 53, S&P up 3. From ABC News, Attorney General Merrick Garland on Wednesday made his first public remarks on the historic indictment of former President Donald Trump on federal criminal charges. Merrick Garland, taking questions at an event on combating violent crime, said he couldn't discuss particulars of the case, but offered general praise for Special Counsel Jack Smith and his team. Here are the questions to the Attorney General at the Justice Department.
Mr. Attorney General, we're coming off the historical image of the former President of the United States. The defendant has been calling your prosecutors names, Republicans in Congress. Some of them have been talking about weaponization of the justice system. When did you find out the special counsel was headed down this track? And why did you choose not to stop him, as was in your power?
So, as you know, I can't talk about particulars of this or any other ongoing criminal matter. As I said when I appointed Mr. Smith, I did so because it underscores the Justice Department's commitment to both independence and accountability. Mr. Smith is a veteran career prosecutor. He has assembled a group of experienced and talented prosecutors and agents who share his commitment to integrity and the rule of law. Any questions about this matter will have to be answered by their filings in court.
One quick follow-up, Mr. Attorney General. Experts in extremism had feared there would be unrest in Miami this week. Some people are saying it's because the Justice Department has been so assertive in prosecuting rioters on January 6th that we have not seen a repeat of that violence. Do you agree with that assessment?
All I can say is we live in a democracy. These kind of matters are adjudicated through the judicial system. The Justice Department will be vigilant to ensure that there are no threats of violence or actual violence.
Here, Thomas.
Can you give the American public a very clear sense of what exactly your role was in the indictment process, just so people can understand what that role is? And then secondarily, given the historic and extraordinary nature of the case, explain to people, if you would, why this was the best and most appropriate step that was taken and why there were no other alternatives.
I'm trying to remember the first question.
Exactly, your role.
Yes, so my role is completely consistent with the regulations that set forth responsibilities to the Attorney General under the Special Counsel regulations, and I followed those regulations. With respect to the second question, this again is asking for particulars, and I'm not going to be able to comment. All of the comments on this will have to come in filings in court.
The Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Justice Department. This was an event dealing with combating violent crime, but at the end, a couple of questions about the indictment and arraignment yesterday of former President Donald Trump on federal charges. He pleaded not guilty in federal court in Miami to 37 counts of improperly retaining classified documents and refusing to return them to the government. Washington Examiner has an article that Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, is demanding access to all records pertaining to the office of Special Counsel Jack Smith, accusing the Justice Department official of unfairly targeting former President Donald Trump by exerting partisan influence. In a letter sent to Attorney General Merrick Garland on Wednesday, Congressman Gaetz requested the DOJ preserve and produce all records from Jack Smith's office, calling his work highly irregular and of extraordinary public concern. The letter offered a deadline of July 7th, although it remains unclear whether Congressman Gaetz would pursue punitive measures if the request is not fulfilled. That reporting from the Washington Examiner. The U.S. House today voted to table, effectively kill, a resolution to censure and condemn Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, for statements and actions related to the Donald Trump Russia investigation. The resolution was offered by Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican of Florida. Here is her remarks on the floor on Tuesday ahead of the vote to table today.
Whereas the allegation that President Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 presidential election has been revealed as false by numerous in-depth investigations, including the recent report by Special Counsel John Durham, which documents how the conspiracy theory was invented, funded, and spread by President Trump's political rivals. Whereas Representative Adam Schiff, who served as a ranking minority member and then chairman of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence of the House of Representatives, HPSCI occupied positions of extreme trust, affording him access to sensitive information unavailable to most members of Congress. Whereas for years, Representative Schiff abused his trust by citing evidence of collusion that, as is clear from reports by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz, and Special Counsel Durham, does not exist.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, on the House floor on Tuesday, part of her privileged resolution to censure and condemn Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California. The vote on the resolution was today. It was a motion to table or kill the resolution, and that passed 225 to 196, with 7 members voting present. On the yes side, 205 Democrats and 20 Republicans. On the no side, 196 Republicans, and those 7 present, 2 Republicans and 5 Democrats. Congressman Schiff sent a letter to his Democratic colleagues this week calling this resolution an attempt to, quote, gratify the former president's MAGA allies and distract from Donald Trump's legal troubles by retaliating against me for my role in exposing his abuses of power and leading the first impeachment against him. A story from Roll Call. House Republicans released a report Wednesday blaming Biden administration officials for high migration levels at the U.S.-Mexico border as part of their efforts to build an impeachment case against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The 55-page report compiled by Republicans on the House Homeland Security Committee represents the latest step from the conference in a bid to remove Secretary Mayorkas from office. There are already at least 4 articles of impeachment filed against him in the House. The Homeland Security Chair, Mark Green, told reporters Wednesday the report represents the first phase of a 5-phase deep dive into the causes of the high migration levels. That reporting from Roll Call.
Today, the United States Congress, under the leadership of Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans, myself as chairman of the Committee of Homeland Security, and the members of our committee, begin a 5-phase deep dive into the causes and Secretary Mayorkas' orchestration of this tragedy. We have provided a document that details the topics of the 5 phases and provides a small glimpse into what we will be looking into in Phase 1, the dereliction of duty phase. What we know right now is that Secretary Mayorkas has either violated or subverted at least 10 laws passed by the Congress of the United States. He has ignored multiple court orders to cease and desist his activities. The blatant disregard for the Constitution of the United States, which states that the United States Congress passes the laws and the executive branch executes those laws, is just scratching the surface to the harm Secretary Mayorkas' dereliction of duty has done to our country. Secretary Mayorkas has blatantly lied to the United States Congress under oath on multiple occasions and lied to the American people at least 58 times. Mayorkas' dereliction of duty has placed the safety of Americans second to his own personal agenda. With hundreds of thousands of dead Americans due to the poison he has allowed the cartels to bring into our country, with the deaths of sheriff's deputies executed by criminal aliens, autistic young women raped, children dead after exposure to fentanyl on the floor of a vacation property. Who in America can feel safe with Secretary Mayorkas' policies?
Congressman Mark Green, Republican from Tennessee, chair of the Homeland Security Committee, at a news conference today with other committee Republicans. It was a news conference held right before a committee hearing on immigration and border security, the phase one that he talked about, the investigation into Secretary Mayorkas' role in migration. C-SPAN covered the hearing, and here is Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi. His statement at that hearing. He's the ranking Democrat on the committee.
Mr. Chairman, Americans have gotten used to political theater from congressional Republicans, but this hearing is a new low. You don't have to look further than the title to know that the hearing is a sham. Calling a hearing and saying case closed before you've heard any testimony is not legitimate oversight. It's obvious this hearing isn't really about border security. It's not even really about Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas or the Department of Homeland Security. It's about partisan politics. It's about House Republican leadership catering to its most extreme mega members who want to impeach someone, anyone at all. It's about trying to make good on GOP backroom deals to elect a speaker, raise the debt ceiling, and stave off a mutiny in the Republican ranks.
Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi, ranking Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee, at today's hearing on border security and immigration. You can find the video of the hearing in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. More from the roll call article on the committee's five-phase investigation of Secretary Mayorkas. Chair Mark Green said the committee will turn its findings over to the Judiciary Committee, which would be responsible for formally launching impeachment proceedings. He estimated the investigation would take 11 to 12 weeks. This is Washington Today. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was a main topic of today's Prime Minister's Question Time in the British House of Commons. Boris Johnson resigned suddenly as a member of Parliament last Friday after he was told he would be sanctioned for misleading Parliament about Partygate, the parties held at the Prime Minister's offices during the COVID-19 lockdowns. But since then, another controversy has come up. As Associated Press reports it, Boris Johnson resigned hours after King Charles III rewarded dozens of his loyal aides and allies with knighthoods and other honors, a political tradition for former prime ministers that drew cries of cronyism from opponents of the ousted leader. Here is the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, being questioned about this by Labour Party leader Keir Starmer at today's Prime Minister's Questions.
Honour should be for public service, not Tory cronies. Yeah! But, Mr. Speaker, isn't this the case? He was too weak to block Johnson's list. And that also means that those who spent their time helping cover up Johnson's law-breaking are rewarded by becoming lawmakers for the rest of their lives. Is his message to the British public, if you don't like it, tough?
Mr. Speaker, it's right that we use the honour system to recognise people, almost 2,000 people a year, from members of the England Lionesses team to the first Asian police officer in Greater Manchester. But he talks about putting people in the House of Lords. Perhaps he could explain why he put forward for a peerage the former MP, Labour MP Tom Watson, who spread vicious conspiracy theories that were totally and utterly untrue, damaged public discourse and inflicted misery on innocent people.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Labour Party leader Keir Starmer during Prime Minister's Question Time in the House of Commons. On the phone now from London is C-SPAN's producer in Great Britain, Peter Knowles. Thanks for being again on Washington Today. Let's start with Boris Johnson's honours list. What is this about?
Well, there's a long-standing tradition that prime ministers, when they leave office, can nominate pretty much anybody they want to. People have been very helpful to them. as political honours. Now, some of those will be going as peers to the House of Lords, where they have a seat for life. Others will get other honours that don't involve the House of Lords. That list has always gone unchallenged, unstopped by the successor Prime Minister, whatever they might think of the people on that list. This particular list has caused real problems because both for those who are on it and those who aren't on it. 7 names were accepted, and there's criticism that they're not of the right calibre to be sitting in the upper house, and that some of them were closely involved in the lockdown parties. So criticism of the names that have gone forward, but the vicious spat that has broken out between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, a spat in public, is over the 8 names who were rejected. And we don't know for sure who those were or what the reasons were. But the allegation from Boris Johnson is that the current Prime Minister interfered with the list and caused those names, one way or another, caused them to be rejected. So the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is condemned for those names he let go forward and criticised for those whose names did not go forward. So it's messy, it's unpleasant, and it's very unusual too, because we haven't really seen, and since the 1980s, when Edward Heath was always taking pot shots at Margaret Thatcher, his successor, we haven't seen this kind of spat between successor prime ministers. It's not what we're used to. So, and it is going on in public.
Boris Johnson resigned suddenly on Friday. Why?
He wrote a letter condemning the actions of the House of Commons Privileges Committee. We haven't yet seen their report, but they've been investigating what he said to Parliament about the breaking of lockdown rules in Downing Street, for which fines were issued. Now, Boris Johnson maintains that he didn't willfully, deliberately mislead Parliament, that he was always acting and speaking in good faith. It would appear that the committee have strongly found otherwise, and that they found recklessly or deliberately misled Parliament, which is regarded as a very serious offence. They have available to them a significant sanction, which is to recommend a number of days suspension from the House. And why that matters is that if it goes to 10 days or above, then that leads to the possibility of the MP being subject to a recall petition of his constituents, which could lead to a by-election and then being ousted. So Boris Johnson has short-circuited all of that by simply resigning and condemning the committee in very, very strong language. He's called them a kangaroo court, that they were biased from the beginning, that they were out to get him, and so on. That's odd, because the committee of 7 MPs, 4 of the 7 are Conservatives, so this isn't an opposition-dominated committee. It is chaired by an opposition MP, and 3 of those 7 are among the most distinguished, senior, well-respected MPs in the Commons. So he's taking shots at quite a big target here. And one of the aspects of this, which some listeners might find surprising, but the language he's used immediately drew comparisons with the language that former President Trump has been using against his accusers in his indictments. So that parallel is out there, is being noticed by everyone. It doesn't particularly help Boris Johnson, because there aren't that many fans of former President Trump in the UK. I wouldn't say there aren't any, but he doesn't have a big popular support base here.
We're talking with Peter Knowles, C-SPAN's producer in Great Britain. Former President Donald Trump is trying to make a political comeback, running again for U.S. president. Will former Prime Minister Boris Johnson also try to come back into power?
He's certainly hinted that he would, and he's used the language of Hollywood film stars to indicate that he might be about to make a comeback. He did that in his exit speech as Prime Minister, and he did it in his missives at the end of last week. There are, however, significant problems around that. You can quite easily see how he could make a comeback as a candidate in the next general election, that he is still very popular in parts of the Conservative Party. He still has a real following, and it would be quite hard for the party leadership to prevent him from standing as an MP. But all the signs are that he would be returning to Parliament, potentially as the next leader, but leading an opposition party, because the opinion polling is absolutely grim for the Conservatives. They consistently now, for many months, they've been polling a massive deficit to Labour opposition. And there are very few Conservatives who you can speak to who think that they are on a roll, that they're on the way to victory at the next election. And of course, they're coming from a position where they have enjoyed a large majority based on Boris Johnson's win in 2019. So the character question that arises is Boris Johnson the kind of person to want to lead a party that may well be going into opposition? And I don't know of anybody who thinks that he's up for that kind of hard work and low reward, because it's not a lot of fun being an opposition party leader. It's a lot of graft and no great fun, and especially once you've enjoyed the fruits of power in Downing Street and of patronage, which Boris Johnson certainly has, then why would he want to be an opposition leader? There's another aspect to this, which is, where does it leave Rishi Sunak? Because in the short run, it's cleared the path for him, because he no longer faces any threat from Boris Johnson making an immediate threat to his position as party leader, because he's no longer a member of Parliament, and therefore he couldn't be Prime Minister in the near future. So on the one hand, it looks like pretty good news for Rishi Sunak. His lurking rival has exited the stage. But to have any chance of winning at the next general election, Rishi Sunak really needed Boris Johnson on side. He needed his popular appeal, his way with words, his appeal to the northern electorate, that is clearly gone forever, because these two guys are not making any pretense other than that they pretty much don't like each other. And so that kind of electoral alliance within the Conservative Party, well, that's gone. So you can see how, yes, there is a theoretical route back for Boris Johnson, but it's hard to see it actually working.
Peter Knowles, C-SPAN's producer in Great Britain, joining us from London. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. A few more headlines. The State Department says Secretary of State Antony Blinken will travel to China to meet with Beijing's senior officials this Friday through next week, becoming the first Secretary of State to visit China in 5 years and the first cabinet-level official to visit in 4 years. Diplomatic ties between the U.S. and China have been tense since Secretary Blinken's trip to China in February was canceled after a Chinese spy balloon was spotted floating across the United States. And from Associated Press, after more than 2 decades as America's best-selling beer, Bud Light has slipped into second place. Modelo Especial, a Mexican lager, overtook Bud Light in U.S. retail dollar sales in the month ending June 3rd, according to Nielsen data analyzed by Bump Williams Consulting. Modelo controls 8.4% of U.S. grocery, convenience, and liquor store sales. Bud Light fell to 7.3%. AP goes on, it's a milestone in the months-long sales decline Bud Light has experienced since early April, when critics vowed to boycott the brand after it sent a commemorative can to Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer. And Bud Light has also faced backlash from Mulvaney's fans who think the brand didn't do enough to support her. That from AP. A story from ABC 7 TV in Philadelphia. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro provided more details on Wednesday about the work that will be done to reopen Interstate 95 in Philadelphia. During a news conference, he said the plan is to fill the gap with backfill and then pave over it to create a temporary roadway and get the highway open again. The Secretary of Transportation of Pennsylvania, Mike Carroll, said the backfill is a lightweight material, a recycled glass-type product that is reusable, and that there will be 3 lanes open in each direction while the state then works to build a permanent bridge to replace the section that collapsed. That from the TV station ABC affiliate in Philadelphia. In Washington, D.C., the head of the Federal Highway Administration, Shaylin Batt, spoke about the federal government's role in repairing this missing section of I-95. It's a busy road for commuters and trucks transporting goods. He was before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. The chair is Senator Tom Carper, Democrat from Delaware.
I'm going to start our questioning, but asking you about the recent disaster that took place just north of us in Pennsylvania on I-95 near Philadelphia. And I know that from our conversations that you spent a fair amount of time there in the days since then. I understand that Governor Shapiro is making an announcement literally in real time as we're gathered here today, and that you might be in a position to comment on what he's saying a little bit later in our hearing, and I look forward to that. But to start off, could you just please talk with us this morning about the role that the Federal Highway Administration will play in coordinating with state and local agencies to respond to the bridge collapse and restore the movement of goods and people around the Philadelphia region while this bridge is being rebuilt?
Well, thank you, Chairman Carper. And as you and the ranking member mentioned, FHWA staff have been working tirelessly on bill. And I just want to highlight that in addition to standing up this law, which has been a lot of effort, we also have to deal with the sort of the business of keeping the federal highway system up and running. And I just want to highlight for the committee that on Sunday, when the calls started coming in, we had dozens of federal highway staff here in D.C., in Pennsylvania, just on calls all day long, and I just want to thank them for their efforts. I showed up in Philly on Sunday, met with PennDOT. I mean, the Secretary Carroll has been doing an amazing job of really marshaling the people there. They've got all the experts that they need. We are acutely aware of the impacts that this closure is having, not just on the city of Philadelphia or the state of Pennsylvania, but the region and the nation. Secretary Buttigieg went to visit yesterday and got a briefing. The president has asked for daily briefings on this project. So every lever that we can pull is being pulled. We released quick release funds last night for $3 million for the state of Pennsylvania, and the bulk of these costs will be covered by the ER program.
All right, thank you. Just as a follow-up, are there any initial takeaways that we can learn from this disaster that might help prevent similar disasters in the future?
Well, I think, Senator, I think, you are keenly aware of this and members of the committee, that just how critical our transportation system is. And I think sometimes we take it for granted that it just operates. And then when something like this happens, it becomes very apparent why these investments are so important, why this infrastructure is so important. And so I would say I think it will be important to wait for the NTSB investigation into the cause and learn any lessons that we can. But I think that I just feel like having been in a lot of those meetings over the weekend and into yesterday, that truly when you just have all of these engineers trying to solve a problem and you have all of the experts in the room, there's just an amazing energy and unified focus. And I think you wouldn't be able to tell who were Democrats and who were Republicans in the room there. And I think that's emblematic of infrastructure solutions.
That's great. Thank you.
Testimony from Shaylin Batt, the administrator of the FHA, Federal Highway Administration, before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. The questions from the chair, Tom Carper, Democrat from Delaware. The I-95 overpass section collapsed on Sunday after tanker truck filled with gasoline overturned and caught fire below. The National Transportation Safety Board is still investigating. The director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Rohit Chopra, got questions today about a new small business loan data collection rule. The CFPB's website explains in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, Congress directed the Bureau to adopt regulations governing the collection of small business lending data. Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act amended the Equal Credit Opportunity Act to require financial institutions to compile, maintain, and submit to the Bureau certain data on applications for credit for women-owned, minority-owned, and small businesses. The description from the CFPB's website. Director Chopra testified today before the U.S. House Financial Services Committee and asking the questions Congressman Dan Muser, Republican from Pennsylvania.
Let's even talk about the 1071 that keeps coming up. Okay, how somehow that's wonderful. Okay, I had a small business committee hearing the other day, and we had 4 Republican and Democrat witnesses, and they all thought it was terrible, that the type of questions that needed to be answered. Now, I know in the final rule you retracted some of the insane information that you wanted to derive, not making it required. But you're asking banks to ask really personal information on people's race, on their sexual preferences. I mean, where does that fit into looking out for the public good?
So that's a statutory directive. So we were under a court order to implement Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act. It requires collection of information on race and other categories. Again, I appreciate that those are types of questions that sometimes are difficult. We try to work with the industry to figure out what's the best way to limit some of that.
If you actually would do that, work with the industry to figure out the best way to provide guidance and oversight so as they can handle and serve their customers best. But honestly, it doesn't sound as if you're doing that. I was in the business world, okay? The more you talk to your customers, the better of a company you become. Now, so that's on 1071, but there's also 13 data points. Statute requires the collection reporting 13 data points, while the rule requires 81. So there's a lot of concern from banks, small banks, primarily community.
Let me just make clear, there's not 81 data points. There's a difference between data fields. So what we're trying to do is create a
I'm going to reclaim my time. No. If it's not 81, then is it 50?
No, I believe it's about 19, 20, something.
All right, then perhaps I stand corrected. That's the information I have.
House Financial Services Committee hearing with testimony from Rohit Chopra, Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and questions from Congressman Dan Muser, Republican from Pennsylvania. Congressman Roger Williams, Republican from Texas, has introduced a resolution that would overturn the CFPB's Section 1071 Small Business Lending Rule and do so through the CRA, the Congressional Review Act. U.S. House over the past couple of days passing bills to prevent the federal government from banning gas stoves or substantially increasing their cost. Some cities and states are prohibiting gas appliances in new buildings. One bill that passed the House says the CFPB cannot ban the gas stoves, and it passed by a vote of 248 to 180. The other bill would overturn the Energy Department's gas stove efficiency rule, and that passed 249 to 181. The Fisk Jubilee Singers from Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, at a White House Juneteenth federal holiday concert celebration Tuesday night. Juneteenth is a combination of June and 19th, commemorating the day in 1865 at the end of the Civil War when a Union general arrived in Texas and told the African Americans there that they were free under President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation from 1863. Vice President Kamala Harris, the first African-American vice president in U.S. history, spoke about the holiday's importance to modern issues.
America is a promise of freedom, liberty, and justice. The story of Juneteenth, as we celebrate it, is the story of our ongoing fight to realize that promise, not for some, but for all. On Juneteenth, we are also reminded of the duality of progress. As we fight to move forward to expand freedom, we must also fight to protect the freedoms already won. And as we know, we can take nothing for granted in that regard. For example, let us look at the sacred freedom to vote, the freedom that generations fought, bled, and died to secure, the freedom that is under assault in states across our nation, and the freedom that we must defend by passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. At the same time, we continue to fight to restore the freedom and the right of every woman in every state to make decisions about her own body. And we fight to make sure that all Americans have the freedom to learn our country's history in full, because while we celebrate a holiday dedicated to teaching and honoring America's full history, extremists across our country attempt to ban books and erase our past. And on this point, let us be very clear. Black history is American history.
Vice President Kamala Harris at the Juneteenth holiday concert celebration on the South Lawn of the White House Tuesday night. Also speaking there, President Biden, and performing marching bands and choirs from historically black colleges and universities, and professional singers Jennifer Hudson, Audra McDonald, and Ledisi. And joining them, 96-year-old Opal Lee, an activist who helped turn Juneteenth into a holiday. Today is also Flag Day, celebrating the adoption of the flag of the United States on June 14, 1777, during the Second Continental Congress. Senator Todd Young, Republican from Indiana, spoke today on the Senate floor about the holiday and the role of Alice Sanger, whose family lived in Indiana. She was the first woman to be part of a White House staff in the late 1800s, and then later moved to the Post Office Department.
In 1908, Alice, as part of her responsibilities at the Post Office, planned and staged a grand celebration for Flag Day. The sound of bands and distinguished speakers lifted out of the old post office building's courtyard where a giant American flag hung. In the years that followed, other government departments joined in the celebration with their own Flag Day festivities, in large part due to Alice's efforts. States followed suit, many with input from Alice herself, who advised local post offices on appropriate celebrations. Presidents Wilson and Coolidge recognized Flag Day with proclamations. And in 1949, the 81st Congress passed, and Harry Truman signed, legislation formally establishing its observance. You see, there's some harmony between Alice's career and her work to promote Flag Day. When we look up at the Stars and Stripes, we catch America's reflection. It's a symbol of our ideals, after all. Wherever it waves, on battlefields where we have defended it, alongside the graves of those who had died for it, in front of the places where its democracy lives, courthouses in our towns, state houses in our cities, the dome under which we meet, and from the homes across the republic for which it stands, our flag represents the promise of freedom and self-government, that any man or woman can live their life in pursuit of happiness. But it also is a reminder that the work of honoring those ideals goes on. It's fitting, then, that on Flag Day we remember Indiana's Alice Sanger. This Hoosier served her country so faithfully in an era where pathways for women to do so were so few. So on Flag Day, we raise a pair of salutes, one to Old Glory, forever may she fly, and a second to the trailblazing spirit of Americans like Alice. Long may it live.
Senator Todd Young, Republican from Indiana, on the Senate floor on today, Flag Day. Tonight is the annual congressional baseball game for charity, Democrats versus Republicans, a tradition that dates to 1909. Congressman Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, who you might remember was shot and almost died at a Republican baseball practice in 2017, this morning at a practice at Nationals Park spoke to the local Washington, D.C. Fox TV station.
We're going to get over 20,000 people that'll show up for the game, raising over $1.5 million, maybe $2 million for local charities, Boys and Girls Club, other organizations like the Nationals Youth Facility too. So it's just a treat to be able to do this and be a part of this.
Everybody looks at this game as a way to kind of, bridge the gap between Republicans and Democrats. The gap seems to be, more of an abyss than ever. You had the former president yesterday in court facing federal charges in Miami. How do we get beyond any of this? Is it possible in the near future?
Hopefully so. And I mean, look, we have really big divides. You pointed out some of them. And then it's not just the personality stuff, which I like fighting for the principles and the values I believe in, and we're very divided even on those. But events like tonight, frankly, are things we need to do more of. You fight for the things you believe in during the day over at the Capitol, and then you come here at night and you're doing some things for really good causes, bigger than yourself. And Republicans and Democrats, we're competing to win. We want to win. Republicans won last year. Democrats want to win. But we get to know each other really well. The players do, and form different kind of levels of respect and bonds. And, you compete to win, but you also, we all love this country. We want to make this a better country, and that's really where the focus should be.
Congressman Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, at Nationals Park this morning on WTTG TV Washington. As of the 2022 game, Republicans lead the series over the Democrats 44-42, and there was one tie. C-SPAN Radio and television will be covering tonight's congressional baseball game for charity. It begins at 7 p.m. Eastern. The play-by-play provided by WTOP Radio in Washington. There'll also be color political commentary. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.